Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Jess Lenore in Baltimore. Football, the world's biggest sport and also the most corrupt. Despite a massive international bribery scandal that's engulfed the sport, just moments ago, FIFA President Sepp Blatter was re-elected to an unprecedented fifth term. Fallout continues to grow after 9 officials from FIFA, the International Soccer Federation, and several others were arrested as part of a U.S.-led investigation into a $150 million international bribery and corruption scheme. Blatter has maintained that he's innocent from this scandal and has defied growing calls to step down. U.S. Attorney General Loretta Lynch announced the charges on Wednesday. Meanwhile, also on Friday, Palestine dropped its bid to expel Israel from FIFA for restricting the movement of Palestinian players. And questions are being raised about the role of large financial institutions and that they played in the corruption and bribes. Well, now joining us to discuss all this and more from Portland, Oregon, is Jules Boykoff. Jules teaches political science at Pacific University in Oregon, a former professional soccer player. He represented the U.S. Olympic soccer team in international competition. Thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you.
So can you just, for people that will be probably having trouble trying to wrap their minds around this growing scandal and the fact that the FIFA president just was reelected to an unprecedented fifth term?
Absolutely. Well, for people who just follow soccer, the beautiful game, they've gotten a rude awakening at how actually there's a real ugly underbelly to the beautiful game. And we've been seeing that all week long with these corruption allegations being leveled against FIFA and this president who, as you said, is just won a fifth term in the presidency. And he's been involved in all sorts of unseemly aspects of the corruption, though for the time being, he seems to have insulated himself enough where they can't exactly press charges quite yet against him.
And so this has been a front page story, as you said, for this whole week. But what is the mainstream media really missing? What is not being discussed in the coverage that we've seen so far?
Well, I would say overall, in terms of covering the corruption aspect, the illegal corruption that they're uncovering through these indictments, they've done a decent job kind of unraveling it, talking about the laws that are in play, talking about the history of the organization and how this corruption stretches back for decades. There are some things, though, that I think we could be talking about right now in this moment while the global media spotlight is on FIFA. And that is, while we have all these illegal corrupt activities, there's also a whole lot of corruption in FIFA that's quite legal. It's totally legal. So, for example, if we look at the Brazil World Cup, just happened last summer in 2014, when the corporations who are sponsors, partners, if you will, of FIFA, dropped into Brazil, across the country, they enjoyed tax-free status. One Brazilian think tank calculated that to be about $250 million free dollars that they got just at the Brazil World Cup alone. And so if you compare that $250 million of tax breaks that these companies got, who are doing just fine, these companies, by the way, we're talking about McDonald's, Coca-Cola, Visa, and whatnot. Compare that $250 million to the $150 million of corruptions that have been alleged in this case. Spicy as they may be, the sort of everyday quotidian corruption that's embedded in FIFA, we also need to talk about as well. Because if we're going to move and change FIFA going forward, we need to think about those legalized systems of exploitation, those legalized systems of expropriation that are dominant when you think about the World Cup.
And can you also talk about, for example, the World Cup happening in FIFA and the fact that it's happening in, I believe, 2020. It's happening in Qatar, excuse me. Mm-hmm. And what are the implications of that? And talk about the human rights abuses that have been exposed during this process.
Absolutely. Well, the guy who's Secretary General of FIFA, his name is Jerome Valcke, he said things very straight not too long ago. He said, sometimes less democracy is a good thing for running a World Cup. And so then you think about, well, it's moving to Russia, it's moving to Qatar, where they don't have to worry about pesky democratic interventions on the part of everyday citizens who might not be happy with spending and that sort of thing. Now, Qatar is a clown show. Let's put it just straight here for you. There's been excellent reporting, investigative reporting from The Guardian and elsewhere about what's called the kafala system of labor. Essentially, Qataris go around the world, they find people to come to Qatar to do manual labor. They've been pulling many people from Nepal, and they bring them illegally to Qatar, and essentially without papers, they become indentured servitude. They become indentured servants. The Guardian called this a modern-day form of slavery, and I think they got it exactly right. So what's happened with Qatar? They've been using these laborers to build their stadiums. They've been dying at a rate of every other day. I want to say that again because it's incredible. The Nepali and other immigrant workers have been dying at a rate of every other day during 2014, according to Guardian research. And what we've seen with reform on the part of the Qataris is that they've limited this kafala system I've described to 5 years instead of forever. So in a weird way, all this attention has only served to entrench the system of kafala. And that's a real problem here. These World Cups for Qatar in 2022 and Russia in 2018 were voted on at the same time back in 2012. And there seems to be all sorts of vote swapping, possible corruption with that as well. And we need to remember that these indictments that just came down out of New York, they have nothing really to do yet with 2018 and 2022. They focus on the 2010 World Cup in South Africa, and they also focus on people that are in the region. It's called the CONCACAF region. That's the confederation of football associations from North America, Central America, and from the Caribbean. So it's very limited, the scope of these indictments, although it appears from the Attorney General that she would like to aim a little bit higher up the food chain and perhaps even go after Blatter himself. I mean, Blatter, reports have said that Blatter is very hesitant to come to North America, very hesitant to come to the United States. And some people have speculated that he might not even be bothered to go to Canada for the Women's World Cup that's coming up. So he's very aware that he's in the crosshairs, if you will, of the Attorney General of the United States.
And you've just written about the Women's World Cup. Because it's a significant event, but it's now happening under the shadow of this huge corruption scandal.
That's right. Dave Zirin, the sports writer from The Nation magazine, and I just wrote a piece that went up today. And we talk about exactly that, how all this corruption has overshadowed what's going to be a wonderful, terrific, fun-to-watch World Cup. That starts on June 6th. It's coming right around the corner. So instead of talking about the amazing athletes, instead of talking about some of the controversies swirling around that World Cup in regards to the use of artificial turf and whatnot, instead we're talking about the FIFA allegations. Now, I think we could talk about both things, but right now, if you look at media coverage, the Women's World Cup is being swept under the rug. If you look at the history of FIFA in regards to women's soccer, it's abominable. In particular, Sepp Blatter has been miserable on the topic. Blatter in 2004 said, when asked how to get women's sports or women's soccer more popular in the United States, he suggested that they wear shorter shorts. He seriously said that. 10 years later, he was at the 2012 Women's World Cup or World Player of the Year Awards, where he apparently didn't even recognize Alex Morgan. She's a huge superstar on the U.S. national team, utterly recognizable. She's one of the 3 people up for the award. You'd think Blatter might be able to recognize her. There's also the case of Abby Wambach, another superstar from the United States team. She was up for the award a following year. She was backstage with her wife, Sarah Huffman, and Blatter ambled up to them and talked to Sarah Huffman saying, "Hey, Marta," who's a superstar player from Brazil, "how are you doing? You're wonderful, etc." Not even knowing that it wasn't Marta, and they really don't look that similar. So there's been insults, but there's also been monomaniacal brand micromanagement on the part of FIFA. A Swedish television company who has rights to the Women's World Cup, they wanted to move toward equality and not call it the Women's World Cup, but instead simply call it the World Cup. But FIFA's phalanx of lawyers went after them and said, if you do that, you could well be in breach of contract. So that's an ongoing situation there. FIFA has been terrible when it comes to the Women's World Cup, and they've just been a one sexist episode after the other. It's been a misogyny-orama.
And I wanted to ask you about Palestine's bid to get Israel expelled from FIFA for its actions restricting the movement of Palestinian players in the occupied territories. What's the latest on that, and can you give us a little background on that?
Sure. Well, we've seen in previous history around both the World Cup and the Olympics when countries who want to bring claims to the wider public use sports bodies like the International Olympic Committee and FIFA to level their grievances and get more attention to them. For example, with the Olympic movement, we saw the suspension of South Africa for many years while they had apartheid. South Africa was also suspended from FIFA, as was Yugoslavia for a short period as well. So it's not unprecedented for people to push their claims through these sport organizations. Now, in regards to the Palestinian situation with the Israelis in this instance, the Palestinians had wanted to get free passage for their soccer players and for others involved in soccer from Gaza to the West Bank. And they were having trouble getting through, and so they wanted to sort of smooth out the passage for these players.
Yeah, and to be clear, it's not just the players. This is for anyone in Gaza or the West Bank. It's very difficult, or if possible at all, to get in between, to travel in between the two.
Absolutely. So, I mean, the soccer players stand in for a wider entrenched problem, and I'm glad you pointed that out. Absolutely. There's also a number of clubs, Israeli clubs, that have settled on the West Bank. That was at issue as well. So what happened today at the FIFA Congress, the very same one where Blatter was elected, the Palestinian representative decided to retract their effort to get Israel suspended from FIFA. Now, there's some backdoor shenaniganizing, again, involving, guess who? Sepp Blatter, who was adamantly opposed to this resolution. The resolution involved sending the issue to the United Nations, where there would be further discussions of it. This was something that Sepp Blatter absolutely opposed. And so when they put the motion forward today at the Congress, that key element involving the United Nations had been erased from it. And so the Palestinian representative was not at all happy about that. By the way, the motion had widespread support. I saw some news reports that said it had in the 160s votes out of 209. I think it was 165 votes. So there was massive support for the Palestinian cause among representatives of FIFA, but they withdrew it and said they're going to work through a FIFA committee, which from my perspective sounds like nothing's going to basically happen, at least not in the short term. FIFA committees are where good ideas go to die.
And finally, do you see a way to get out of this scandal and, restore the public's faith and confidence in FIFA, or does FIFA need to be abolished?
Well, the other day, Sepp Blatter said something that I actually agreed with. He said, "I'm sure that more bad news will follow." I think he's right. I think that there will be deeper investigations. This has cracked open the window of possibility, and we could see investigations into the 2018 World Cup in Russia and the 2022 World Cup in Qatar. And so when that happens, we'll see more news coverage, and who knows, maybe even Blatter won't have insulated himself quite as much as he wishes. Now, there are fractures within the soccer world, such as between UEFA, which is the body of European football federations, soccer federations, and FIFA. Michel Platini, who's the head of UEFA, this European group of soccer federations, he is opposed to Blatter. They were very outspoken that they were going to vote for his opposition today, Prince Ali of Jordan, a 39-year-old from Jordan. And so that fissure isn't getting any less wide as we speak. Whether to abolish FIFA, that's an interesting question. I've seen that idea bandied about, and certainly major structural changes are in order. There's been some good ideas. I mentioned Dave Zirin before. He had the idea of having it split in two, basically, and you have one that carries out the football side and then another separate body that looks at these kind of scandals and actually has some kind of enforcement mechanism where if there are shenanigans, if there are money being passed, and there's tons of money that's been passed, that they can stop that in its tracks. So whether to abolish FIFA, hey, I'd be fine with that. It's become such a barnacle on the ship of soccer that we really need to just scrape it off. But that's probably not going to happen anytime soon. Sepp Blatter's at the helm. He's going to keep moving it forward. In the meantime, it seems to me that people who are lovers of soccer need to start raising questions, even at the club level as well. And I think we're going to see some fight back at the level of the confederations, the various countries, at the country level and then within their wider confederations. So there will be a little bit of fight from the inside, but nothing's going to get done unless it's an inside-outside battle against this huge behemoth.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to having you on again as this scandal continues to unfold.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for joining us at the Real News Network.